Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first in the series of Everyone Hates Recruiters. Today we're joined by Laura O'Callaghan, who is Product Recruiting Manager at Facebook in London. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Happy Friday.
Yeah, same to you. Just to kick off, do you want to give us sort of a background on your recruitment experience to date?
Yeah, of course. So I've actually been in the world of recruiting for, almost 10 years. Started in an agency in Manchester, where I spent, around 3.5 years. And then made the big move to London, where I joined Robert Walters for a year, and then made the even bigger move into internal recruiting with Deloitte consulting. So I was there for just over 2 years. And as you said, I'm now in Facebook. I'm coming up to just over 3.5 years in Facebook, working on their product team. So right now I lead a team of 6 people that are a mix of between sources and recruiters. So yeah.
Do you want to give us a breakdown, a day-to-day breakdown on how that role sort of, or what it entails and what each day brings?
Yes, so obviously the last couple of months have changed what any normal day would look like. Now we all work from home, as does everybody globally. So honestly, it sounds like a cliche, but we really don't have one day. There's never a standard day, particularly in Facebook. I guess we definitely operate like we've such a large company, and we have the benefit of being part of a global 50,000 person company. However, we definitely kind of operate like startup in the office environment and the way that the style that we work. My day can vary. We have team meetings. I would also work with the business quite closely. So our stakeholders, working through like headcount plans with them. We also have a huge events team that we work with, which obviously all our events are now virtual. However, we still have meetings with them to run our events virtually. Guess sometimes, and probably less so now since moving into the lead role, I would have met with candidates that are coming on site for interviews, and also worked with our coordinating team in London. So there's no one real day, but I would definitely say that our roles are very much cross-functional. So while we sit as part of a core recruiting team, 9 times out of 10 we're working with the business.
And I know you touched on it, talking about COVID and sort of how things have changed. Like what's been sort of obviously the fact you're not in the office is the obvious one, but any sort of other major changes as a result of COVID?
I guess not. Well, I can say positive. The positive experience is that we haven't slowed down our hiring in Facebook, which is definitely a plus, and I'm very thankful for that. I guess a more obvious change was moving all of our interviews from on-site and in-person to virtual. That's something that we were probably planning 18-24 months down the line. However, like everybody else, we were propelled to change quicker than anticipated. So that would be our biggest change in the recruiting process, but it's actually worked really well. And I think we were probably well set up as a company because we work from home quite a lot. So it wasn't completely alien to maybe be meeting a candidate over a VC versus in person. But yeah, it's been good so far. The experience is positive. We're, as I said, still hiring people. I guess from a candidate point of view, of course, they don't get to come into the office. So I can only speak on our behalf, but we have regular touch points with both successful and unsuccessful candidates through the survey. And the sentiment is still pretty strong. And we still have people joining every week, which is great.
And those changes you mentioned, do you think a lot of those will stay, or do you expect them to sort of slide off again whenever things go back to normal?
No, I imagine they'll probably stay for the most part. I guess it will probably maybe, and I'm speaking with no intel, is that maybe for more senior hiring, we would still have the people coming on site because, of course, they're likely to want to meet some of the more senior people in the teams, and maybe meet their teams or potential teams. But from an interviewing point of view, I would be quite surprised if we go back to 100% in-person interviewing. And that's, I guess, on the basis of like whether we go back to the office, whether we actually have people that are remote full-time, which is obviously, as people have probably seen in the news, it's pretty likely that's the way our teams will go.
Mm-hmm. And have you been given sort of any dates on when you might return to the office, or is it still very much in the air?
No, I think it's very much in the air. Each office is definitely, or each country is being led by government, of course. Some of our APAC offices, there was talk of going back. But again, like anywhere, it's going to be a phased return, if at all. But I would be planning that we won't be in the office until the end of the year. But again, you never know.
And for you personally, what's the perfect balance? Totally remote, totally office, or do you like the split between sort of the two?
Definitely the split between, because I think, as I said, we're fortunate that we were able to work from home within reason prior to COVID. And I think had I known that COVID was coming and that I'd have to work for the best part of 7 months in an apartment, I would have definitely said no. However, I actually really like it. So going back, I think I would definitely not opt for full-time remote. Maybe going into the office 2 or 3 days a week would be the ideal. And especially the role that I'm in, I'm leading a team. So it's really important to meet people. Like there's some people that have joined my team that I haven't even met yet in person, which is crazy. But yeah.
And what is, obviously Facebook extremely well known. How would you say it's sort of, it's different to previous companies that you work for? Obviously Deloitte might be obviously one that's of similar size and ilk, but what does Facebook feel internally like as opposed to others?
I think Facebook, as I said at the start, it's very much like a startup. So the best way I can describe it is when I joined Facebook, I remember thinking, gosh, I will probably only be here for like a year because I really want to start my own company. And anywhere I was before, like Deloitte, like I didn't have the autonomy in my role and I wasn't able to like impact or make change like in processes, where in Facebook you're given that that autonomy, and you can you work as a small business and you can, change things around. So it's very flexible, very startup feel. It's very inclusive of people, which I don't think every other company is, in my experience. You're not a number, and that's a question I get asked a lot, like, oh my gosh, like there's 50,000 people, am I just going to go in and get like lost in a major company, when in fact you're genuinely not. And it's very respectful, it's flat as an organization, which is huge. Like there's, I could be sitting in meetings with people that are, senior directors, and everybody's treated with the exact same respect, irrespective of seniority or role or org.
So no plans to leave anytime soon by the time?
Not yet. No. Unless I make the move back to Ireland, but no.
And sort of, I know you talked about your team and what they do. So is it just they totally source, or what specifically do they do as they report into you?
So the model that we have in Facebook is it's like a recruiter sourcer model. So we do have some recruiters that are 360 in the sense that they will source candidates and then close candidates. However, my team is split between sourcers and recruiters. So sourcers naturally source the talent, and they will bring a candidate through to their final stage interview and then pass them across to a recruiter who will manage that process going forward to offer. So yeah, it's a mix of sourcing and recruiter.
Okay. And do you find the name sells itself, or do some people, as you say, well, I'm one of 50,000, it's not sort of the type of organization I'd like to work for?
I guess, yeah, I think the organization, the brand is very strong, and particularly for the type of roles that we recruit for. So I recruit for research, and like there's a huge amount of interest from researchers to want to research a product that's impacting billions of people. So more often than not, we wouldn't have people would be very keen to work here, with removing any arrogance that's associated with.
And is there anything that you think, like internally or tech wise, that Facebook do way better than anybody else, or in your experience that you find?
No, I guess no, not from an interviewing point of view, but I guess they really listen to candidates. And like, as I said earlier, there's surveys after every stage of the interview. So they're very aware of kind of the experience associated with interviewing, like irrespective of success or not. So they do that well. And they're just very flexible in the style of interviews. It's not very it's structured, but it's not like, okay, I'm going to ask you how many windows you saw in the building and the lift up. It's not, they're not there to trick you. They're very human in their approach to interviewing.
Companies like that would have sort of reputation for sort of clever or niche ways of throwing something in through an interview process. That's not the idea?
Not in my experience. No, and I've sat in interviews, so I hope for the best part anyway, it's not.
And is that interview process just traditional as it would be for any others, or is there anything you think they do differently?
No, I don't think they deviate really from the norm majorly. Every pipeline or area of the business is different. So as I said, I'm researching content strategy. However, the software engineering team, of course, will do things completely different to us, and they probably rely on tech naturally because they're coding and stuff like that. Whereas for research, we don't. So no.
And do you have sort of a set idea of where you want to go over the next 2 to 3 years internally? Can you see what sort of the next step is and what you want to do?
Yeah, I think so. I would like to probably lead a larger team. I would have thought maybe, my team currently is split between Dublin and London, so I guess having a bit more scope in both of the offices would be ideal. But that said, I'm only in a lead role since January, so I'm still kind of finding my feet a little bit. But yeah, you never know. There's so much variety that
What type of manager are you?
A nice one. I know. I think it's because it's very flat as an organization. There's not that managerial feel. It's not. Um, it's not. Everybody. It's peer to peer, really. And the nature, I guess, of a lead is just to help people. You're not their manager per se. And my team are incredible, and they're extremely experienced and great. Generally.
Sort of working for a company like Facebook, they'll be very much at the forefront of sort of trends and sort of things that are likely to change. Is there anything that you think is there anything you think specifically about how recruitment will change over the next 4 to 5 years, even possibly some of the stuff that's fallout from COVID? Just things that any trends or anything you think that will sort of pan out, and things that we might be doing differently over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years?
I wouldn't say a huge amount. I think that the natural thing, and it's probably not what people want to hear, but I think there's definitely a shift away from agency, and people wanting to bring recruiters internally and them being part of a core business versus maybe sitting outside and supplying the talent. So I think, in my opinion, there seems to be a shift slightly towards people coming in, because you've got a lot of variety then, like as a recruiter and a sourcer in Facebook. That's not your sole role. You work in events, you work in like diversity and inclusion initiatives. I think that, but I think it's also now more so like a candidate driven market, that we'll probably have to shift our processes somehow.
And I know you touched on it, obviously, with internal functions and obviously good recruiters going internally. Facebook is obviously, especially in Dublin, is one of the ones that swallows up a huge amount of very good recruiters. Do you think that, without sort of stating the obvious, that agency side, do you see that being tougher or dying away, or where do agencies add value?
I think agencies can add value when it's very niche and the types of roles, and I think particularly like senior executive headhunters, I think are definitely have value. Like there's, I guess, for companies that maybe hire like one-off role, it wouldn't probably make sense to have an internal recruiter because the volume isn't there, and they probably rely on somebody who's got like a specialization in a particular industry or like a field. So I guess yeah, there's always going to be a need for agency. I also think as well, like contract recruitment, I think the pace that contract recruitment goes at is kind of probably lends itself better to an agency, I would have thought.
No, that's a good point. And obviously, having came from an agency type background into internal, what sort of things do you think you've learned from being that side of the fence and now being on the side that you are? What do you think you learned from that side that you brought across?
I think being resilient. Like I think with agency, naturally you get knocked back quite a lot. So there's the resilience. I think also being able to negotiate. Like I don't think you have. Had I always just been an internal recruiter, I don't know if I would have the negotiation skills that I would have maybe when working with an agency or part of an agency. So you're negotiating, I guess, terms, you're negotiating with candidates. Also like a candidate experience and empathy. Like I don't know if you get it as much necessarily when you're internal, whereas when you're an agency, you're like representing the candidate maybe at with multiple different organizations. So you get that exposure to what's really important to them.
So you think you empathize or feel closer to the candidate if you're representing them on the agency side as opposed to internal?
I don't think you necessarily get closer, but I think you get a better understanding because you're naturally working with different companies, and something that stands out in a particular process for a candidate in one company may not be the same. So you get a little bit more of depth of understanding. But then also you could probably argue that candidates are working with multiple agencies, and do they have the time to dedicate to one particular agency or recruiter?
And do you want to talk me through sort of both good and bad experience you've had with recruiters internally? Could be going back to Deloitte, could be with Facebook, where there's a company that you've dealt with have been tremendously good, and on the flip side, awful.
Yeah, I guess when I was with Deloitte, we had an amazing agency that we worked with. For context, I was recruiting for SAP and Oracle, so not an area that I knew at all, even in my past. Like I didn't know it, but we worked with an agency called Next Ventures.
You don't have to name and shame.
Okay, they're amazing. They're their best. They were our best agency from a metric point of view, but also from a relationship point of view. They were just really, really strong. But they took a lot of time to understand the business really well, and the inner workings of it without overstepping. They also didn't constantly ring you nonstop, which was a huge thing. They respected the boundaries, and I think they put the partnership with the internal recruiting team first versus trying to make hires. So that meant that when they had strong candidates, I was fighting for their candidates versus maybe another agency that didn't have that understanding, or that, like, I guess the mutual respect. And as I always said to them, I was like, I was an agency. There's no difference. Like, I was there. I was the person on calling Deloitte a year ago. Like, I'm not trying to like catch anyone out. I just want to be fair, and like, let's all be able to do our jobs together and successfully. So they were really, really good. And it definitely resulted in lots of hires, and they got a lot of respect from the business, and like partners and stuff. And Deloitte really rated them because they had a less of a pushy approach, I guess.
And does that back up what you spoke about whenever you talk about niche, the fact that they were in a niche market, and that's why they were able to add value?
Absolutely. Like, their recruiters and sources really knew the SAP market inside out, and I could nearly be confident that I didn't even have to look at a CV before sending it across, because I knew that they knew what they were talking about. They weren't going to put the wrong people in front of the business. So I guess there was a lot of trust there, and when you get to that, then it's definitely a partnership. On the flip side, bad agencies, I guess.
Too many to mention.
Yeah, God, I don't know. How long do you have? No. There's none that really particularly stand out. I guess just a theme that I would have found across other agencies was the, just sending CVs for the sake of sending CVs and stuff like that. And I think when you go internal, like, ultimately it's your name on the line. You're the internal recruiter, and most times partners and stakeholders won't know who the agencies are. So you're representing yourself. So if you can't be confident that the candidates that they're sending you are strong, the trust isn't there really. But no, there's no major, I guess, agencies that we had issues with. I'm sure now later on I'll think of some, and I'll come back to you if I think. But yeah, I guess it's just the whole thing is partnership. Like, anywhere you go, it's just really understanding the business and taking that time versus trying to jump in too quickly.
Mm-hmm. And now the toughest question: any sort of funny stories from that side of the fence?
Not really, I guess. I suppose funny stories with agencies. No, by and large, I've gotten on really well with agencies. Like, and what's really nice is, like, I've stayed friends with a lot of the people I worked with in an agency from my Deloitte days. We don't actually use agency at all on Facebook. So we did at a stage, I guess, when we were scaling, probably when I started, and we worked on product design roles. But no major like funny stories. Like, I went to the rugby with them quite a lot, which always resulted in lots of wine and beer and stuff. So I guess if that counts as funny, potentially.
Those were agencies that you would have used, and the relationship was that strong that you would socialize with also. Yeah,
and I still do. Like, I still meet up with the guys that I worked with in an agency. So yeah, no major.
So you touched on also. I think you mentioned sort of candidate experience. That's obviously, I presume that's something that's very, very important at Facebook.
Yeah, 100%. It's pretty much everything, because we want we treat, I suppose, everybody with respect as a baseline. But I think candidate experience, I've never been in a company that values candidate experience the way we do. As I said, like, we run a survey across every single candidate, and like we donate, I think it's $10 or $20 for every candidate that participates into a charity of their choice, to encourage people to do it, because we really value that feedback. And it's very individual. Like, there's lots of like things in place. If for any reason you had an accommodation situation that you needed something, we tailor the service like completely. Like, I don't think there's ever been a bad experience really, in my opinion. The way our teams are structured is that we have a coordinating team that will manage all of the communication between the candidate when their interviews are scheduled, and like, they will meet them on the day of their interviews. Then I will meet them later on in the day and stuff like that. So candidate experience is huge, and it's really important as well. We definitely like value like how the candidate find the interviewers as well. It's not just the recruiting team. It's, were people respectful of your time? There's so many different facets to it, but yeah, it's huge. And that's what I love, because I think it's so detrimental to a company if you have a bad candidate experience. Anybody that's been on like Glassdoor or Blind will be able to read read the horror stories, I guess, that come. And also, it's something that I'm passionate, because I remember interviewing with a company here in Dublin, but when I was based in London, and like a really big, well-known company, and interviewed with, I think, second of 3 stages, and then I never heard a single thing from them after multiple chasing. And I would have always been passionate about it. But even like when you go so far into recruiting that you forget to sit in the candidate seat, and I sat there and I was like, hey, this is really poor. So.
Yeah, very true. And I know you talked obviously that Facebook is totally standalone on the internal function recruitment wise. Is there anything that you sort of think sourcing wise, or how they attract candidates, that they do better than most?
I guess we're really big on events as well, and that's where we would source quite a lot of talent, and they're kind of very much industry events. So We tend to we definitely network at those. Our sourcers, and honestly, I'm not a sourcer, so I'm not trying to big myself up by any means. Our sourcers are like world class. Like the stuff that they can do when it comes to like searching for talent is unbelievable.
Give us an example.
Oh gosh, now you put me on the spot. I personally didn't really know what an X-ray search was before. However, maybe that's really basic, but they seem to be able to just find the best talent through, well, we have internal systems, so we build our own recruiting function.
For those that don't know, watching this, tell them what an X-ray search is.
God, don't say that. It's basically where you scan, I think from my understanding is that you scan the internet based on like word searches and pulls profiles up and stuff. But like when you sit in a meeting with a sourcer and they write out like Boolean strings and stuff, it's like, for me anyway, it's mind-boggling. Maybe it's very basic, but so yeah, the sourcing, their capabilities are huge.
So that just shows a true understanding of what they're looking for, the nuts and bolts, being able to
yeah, absolutely. Like the sourcing interview by all accounts is one of the toughest. So yeah, that, and I guess we use like all the usual LinkedIn. We typically don't use job boards as such, but more often than not, we will be like reaching out to people ourselves versus working on incoming applications, because there's for certain roles are very niche that we would be looking for passive talent versus active.
And are you targeted in any way on bringing in a certain amount of people, or how does it work? Because obviously there has to be a volume of sorts.
Yeah, of course. Like we have headcount plans every year, so like any recruiter, the aim is to fill the headcount. So yeah, we would have plans at the start of each year, our growth plans. So that's kind of what we'd be targeted on. But things like candidate survey and stuff, candidate survey experience is one of those as well. So it's not just about like come in and fill the headcount. It's not that way.
And I presume, obviously, who Facebook are being extremely well known, I presume diversity and promotion of that internally is very important. Do you want to talk us through sort of what they do around sort of things like that and why it's more important now than ever?
I guess can't really talk too much about what we do, but yeah, I can just definitely like say that it's such an important part of everything. I think I hope, I would feel at the forefront of diversity, and I think it's built in very early on, like even when you're interviewing and stuff. It's not a second thought, it's very much part of our DNA. We're always thinking in a diverse approach, and I think that's a diverse mindset, and I think that's definitely reflected in the people that we hire. And what I really like about Facebook is we don't have like a typical like person or profile. It's not, we don't hire like that, whereas other companies I think tend to say, okay, maybe let's get somebody from the big four because they will fit in here. We're quite adaptable, and we hire for cognitive diversity as well. So yeah, diversity is like top of mind. And we, even as recruiters and business partners, like you partner on projects around diversity, outside of just the core recruiting function.
And I know you touched on it with regards to dealing with stakeholders. Do you find those expectations are easy to manage, or do you think it's?
I guess, yeah, by and large, yeah. There's because our organization's so flat, everybody is so respectful of each other. Like recruiting is seen as like a proper, like a true partnership, and it's not a service by any means. So we work extremely closely with them.
Did you find Deloitte the same or different?
Well, I guess Deloitte was different because I was on site via AMS, so we were in fact a third party. However, I was very embedded in the partnership or the consulting area because I used to sit with them full time. But I would have said yes by virtue of the model that they had. It was more of a service. But I also think it's what you make it as well. You can choose to go down the route of just hitting targets and providing it. But then if you want to go down the consultative route, I think you can. Whereas Facebook, I think, is definitely it's consultative, and we're like embedded as much as a product designer is, or a content strategist or a software engineer is.
I know you also touched on it previously with regards to events and networking they do. Any sort of clever or standout events that you think from the past that really you remember?
They're all amazing. No, in fairness, Facebook events are incredible. Like that. When I first accepted the offer, they invited me to one of our product design events just to meet some of the team, and I was shocked at how well it's done. It's just the standard that they work to is very strong, and it's very much again, like candidate experience. We always ask after the event, like to the attendees, like what could we do differently? How could we improve on that? No, I guess there's no one thing that we do better, I think, than anybody else. But I think it's all about the people. And of course, when we hold events, there's representatives throughout the business at the event. And I think that's what makes it, being honest. Our events team are world class in what they do. And as I said, I think what we're good about is asking the question, like, is this still relevant? And we're not just doing the same event because it's an annual thing. It's like, how can we improve that or adapt?
As recruiters for events that are maybe built around trying to attract people, do you have any input into that, or is that's just
much? We work. Yeah. So since I've been in Facebook, I've been in like Berlin, Paris, Barcelona, California for events. It's a partnership. Like you as a recruiter own the event with the event manager. So it's not like just turn up on the day by any means. And they value, because again, the types of events we do are tailored towards what are our product objectives. And, an example, like we hold one called SHIP, which is Start Here to Inspire Product. And that's a research event that has spun out of our US office. And it's just a research industry event where we get people together, researchers around the world, and they meet to talk. And we will have like speakers from Monzo, speakers from Google and stuff. And that's just purely to, for want of a better word, service the research community and bring people together.
Okay, good. Sounds excellent. And is there anything as a traditional, what we would say, recruiter, what's sort of the one thing that you think you've learned most from Facebook that you never had thought from previous experience?
God, that's a good question. I don't know. I think what I would say, what I like about Facebook is the variety in roles. In my role, like, I'm not, even when I was a recruiter, I wasn't just recruiting. As I said earlier, like, you have events, you work on like diversity and inclusion initiatives that are not necessarily directly impacted, or they don't directly impact recruiting. I think because it's quite a flat organization, you truly get to know people, and you're like valued for your opinion on things. But I guess what I've learned, I guess negotiation, internal negotiation, and working with people with different opinions, and learning to kind of have kind of respectful conversations.
And realize, like, negotiation, do you mean specifically around sort of money and salaries, or is it just sort of managing stakeholders and negotiating with them type of thing?
Everything, honestly, because there's like obviously managing hiring managers' expectations. However, we work internally with like the compensation team. We work with immigration teams. There's so many different areas that you actually negotiate on or negotiate with. And then also, as I said, we have a coordinating team, and we work to their capacity and stuff like that. So yeah, constant negotiation.
Sounds like it. And in your opinion, sir, I know this might be a difficult one to maybe nail down to three things, but what traditionally do you think makes a good recruiter on the internal side as opposed to the agency side?
Internally, I think being empathetic. I think if you're not empathetic, it's very difficult to represent a candidate and also represent the business externally. So I think you have to be that. You have to be, I guess, respectful, because you realize that you're managing so many people's expectations as well. So you act really as a representative of the candidate, but also a representative of the business with the candidate. So being aware of that. And I guess being fun and not taking it too seriously, because I think, you don't want to go down the sales route. And I'm always really mindful when we work with stakeholders that maybe think that all recruiters just want to like hire people and they're prepared to push talent in irrespective of quality. So I think, being just managing expectations, really. But having fun. Like, I can honestly say I enjoy my job every day, and it doesn't really feel like work for the most part. Hopefully other people would agree. Maybe it's not just me, but yeah. And just, you get to meet so many amazing people all the time. And that's what I like about working in a big company. And we have like really good internal communications tools. So you can chat, I probably chat to somebody different every day, which is cool.
And if you were to give your younger self career advice and when you were starting out, what would you say?
I would still say work on agency side. I think you learn so much. There's no major thing that I say, gosh, I wish I hadn't done that in my career. And that I'm, I suppose, thankful for that. But I would say, go to agency and do the things, represent loads of different companies. I think that gave me a really good idea of when I wanted to work. Like, as you know, we worked with Deloitte when I was agency, and I always knew that they were a client I'd love to work with, and I just like their style. So you do get that exposure when you work in an agency versus going straight in internally. So I wouldn't say I'd do anything different. I think I would probably be more inclined to network and be like a face-to-face person, because over the years you really realize that they're the kind of relationships that you really see a lot of rewards from. So I guess
That's definitely something that's changed over the last 4, 5, 6 years. I think more so than ever. Whereas before, not that you didn't, not that you didn't have to do it, but it wasn't as valuable as it is now.
yeah, 100%. Like I have a friend who's an Irish guy who's living in London, and he's a recruiter, but his primary kind of role really is to physically meet people and build the relationships, and then works with the team. And you really see the value of that. And like you're selling yourself, I guess, as well. So I would definitely be inclined to go to more events, and those kind of networking things. I think everybody dreads doing them, but once you get there, like it's so valuable. And also, what I would say is be an SME, like be a subject matter expert, because that's where your value. Like I think when I joined the first agency, I was probably more generalist. If I was going back and I was telling somebody, I would say maybe spend your first year generalist and then decide like where's your niche and like what are you really passionate about, because that's what comes out then when you're speaking with clients. And it's a USP, I guess, when you're going to the point earlier around the agencies, like that they knew what they were talking about, and they were, you know, they were doing that versus trying to like service all the other areas of the business. So I wouldn't train to be a coder or an SAP consultant, but I would try and get
Yeah, an
really
understanding of it.
yeah.
And what's the best advice you were ever given, like career wise? Doesn't have to be from somebody that you necessarily worked with or alongside, or it could be somebody who was outside of your career, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's probably from my dad.
I had a feeling
He
you'd say
said,
that.
he said, well, there's two people, yeah, but my dad always said like think about yourself, because I think when you're younger and you go into a company, and then there's so many people that say to me, I'm terrified of handing in my notice, and it's such a basic thing, but I'm always like, you need to think about yourself and you know, think about number one. So I definitely be confident in like your own decisions, and say like, you know, look, it's natural to move on, those kind of things. Also when I joined Facebook, I remember my first manager, I went to meet him in the US, and he said, how are you getting on? And I said, oh, it's good. I said, I don't feel I've met that many people though. And he said, oh, but have you introduced yourself? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, that's what you need to learn. Like if you don't ask, you know, you don't get, within reason. So I was used to being in a company like Deloitte where you were kind of walked around the office floor on your first day, probably a bit cringe, but like, you know, you're introduced to people. So it
Yeah,
was maybe like, I guess it's under the theme of own your own career, really. So I would definitely say that to people, and don't be afraid. Like it's better to just try something and say, okay, it didn't
no,
work out.
totally agree. And nearly done, don't worry. Plans for the next 12 months? Do you see anything changes for your own career, where you go, or even where the company goes? And what's sort of the plans for the next 12 months?
I guess no. As I said, I'm only 6 months into being a lead, so I definitely like another 6 months at least. Um, it would just be interesting maybe to get different exposure within Facebook, because I sit in product. So I don't really have any kind of, well, I have an understanding, of course, like software engineering, or maybe even like something around like university recruiting or graduate recruitment, or on the flip side, maybe leadership recruitment. But right now, I don't have any plans to move. Um, I would love in the very kind of future would love to be a consultant that goes into startups and talks to them through how you build out an internal recruiting team, or like a, you know, even like a company that goes in, or a company that goes in and says, okay, I'm going to hire your first 20 people over 6 months, and then I'll leave, and then I'll go on to the next company. Because I think that'd be really interesting. I love when you try and like implement a different system into a startup or an existing company, but that's a long time
Do you
away.
think do you think the experience of like a huge company like Facebook marries up with the smaller company who needs to hire 20?
Yeah, because I think you can implement a lot of best practices, is probably what I've learned from Facebook. And more often than not, like that's maybe where companies, you know, lose out in talent, because they're not as mature in the way they approach or attract talent. And then even when they attract the talent, is the process proper? Is the process buttoned up enough? So I think I could definitely take things from that I've learned in Facebook for sure. And as I said, it's still like a startup feel. So you kind of feel like you're building out the research team, and which is, I guess, equatable maybe to a small startup.
No, that's a clever niche.
Yeah, don't steal
Final
it.
question, you'll be glad to hear. So I didn't tell you this question actually.
Okay.
So basically, at the end of each vlog, we're going to ask somebody to nominate somebody else that
Oh,
they think would be worthwhile speaking to. So somebody that you could have worked with at Facebook, Deloitte, whatever it may be, or somebody on the talent side of the fence that you think would be particularly good at this, or has got a good story to tell.
Jack Thompson. He's my Jack with a K. He is the agency that I worked with in Deloitte Next Ventures. He leads a team there of SAP recruiters and sourcers. So he would be somebody I would nominate, and he's good fun. He's from up north. No, is he? Gosh, yeah, he's from Manchester, I think, actually.
Oh, very good. So are we okay to tag him on this?
Yeah, I'll text him and tell him, yeah. You won't mind.
No, spot on. That's it. Listen, thanks a lot.
No probs. I'll go and drink my champagne. I'll act surprised now when it arrives at the door.
Bear with me 1 second. Thanks a lot, Laura.
No worries.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching the first in the series of Everyone Hates Recruiters. Thanks a lot to Laura O'Callaghan for getting involved from Facebook. If anyone else would like to get involved, then please reach out or get in touch. Thanks.